Well, good morning. This is Dave Crocker. We're doing another podcast on Warriors, Hard Chargers, and Patriots, connecting the little dots to the big dots. And it's my extreme privilege to have an old shipmate from my George Washington days with me, Chris Altman. I don't speak a lot in the context of George Washington. I seem to speak a lot in the context of Carl Vinson, but on George Washington, I was the executive officer, so I was the number two guy. And in many ways, I often tell people that was my best job in the Navy because I got to work with people like Chris on a very intimate level, and walk around and talk to sailors every day, which I love to do. As you became a commanding officer, there were a lot of other responsibilities that filled that time void as well. So, but being on this particular ship, she's a brand new ship. She was commissioned in 90 or 91. I forget the exact year. I was there for that. Or not commissioned, but went on her first deployment. So there's a lot of good things that went on. So let me talk to you about Chris for a moment, and then we'll dive into some questions. So Chris joined the Navy in 1988, if I have it right, as a young E1, Chief Petty Officer. Now, as I understand it, correct?
Yes, sir.
Not an easy task to get to become a Chief Petty Officer. He has two boys. How old are they now, Chris? They were 20 and 16 when you last told me about them.
32. They're 32 and 28.
Amazing. How old are your granddaughters, your two granddaughters?
Almost 7 and 4.
We'll get back to both of them in a moment, because I can't think of a better role model for young people, and maybe not so young people, than Chris. He's one of these people, he sent me his bio information. He said, well, maybe it's too much information. And I said, I'm thinking to myself, I always criticize people in this country that want to withdraw from the national treasure of this country. They want free food, they want free this, they want this and such, but they never ever make a deposit in the country. They don't put any service back into the country. It's fundamental banking, right? You can't take a withdrawal unless you made a deposit, but there's a lot of people that are doing that. And Chris is quite the opposite, in my opinion. He's been depositing into this nation for a long, long time, and continues to do so. And I'm going to ask him to talk about that a little bit as well, because he's expanded his horizon and service in other places, like chaplain of his VW post, Scoutmaster. God, I love Scoutmasters, because this young man, Mr. Altman here, I'm sure is teaching his scouts all about honor, courage, and commitment. Marriage is sweetheart of 34 years. So you married her while you were in the Navy?
I married her. I joined the Navy, and then I married her 2 years after I was in the Navy, or about a year and a half after I was in.
So we got another hero right there, because for Chris will agree with me with this, I'm sure. Our spouses and our families are we should thank them as much for their service as you would thank any service member at all. So Chris joined the Navy in 1988. Went to recruit training command. Tell me what got you into the Navy. Why the Navy? What was the decision to join? And then tell me about your experience at recruit training command in terms of how it changed you.
So I always was intrigued by the Navy. My grandfather was a gunner's mate in World War II. I had a couple uncles in the Navy. I wasn't quite sure on my direction. I was not your role model teenager. Had some problems with at home, with some discipline. And my dad actually took me down to the recruiting station between my junior and senior year and told me, you're going to join the Navy because when you graduate, you need a place to go. And so, because I couldn't stay there, I had younger brothers and sisters that I wasn't a great role model for. And so I joined between my junior and senior year.
Okay.
Left in July, left shortly after graduation, went to boot camp in Orlando. I remember watching these two company commanders that were really, really tough on another company. And I was thinking to myself, boy, I'm glad they're not my company commanders. And then 5 minutes later, they had made a mistake and they had the wrong company. So we ended up with those two company commanders. So,
it's always the way it works.
Always the way it worked. And I even went into boot camp being kind of that smart aleck. I remember when we were stenciling our dungarees, for those who remember dungarees and stenciling dungarees, the company commander had told me, he had said my name wrong, and I corrected him, and that wasn't the right thing to do. And so he had promised me that by the end of boot camp, that he and I were going to dance. And
And boot
so
camp was 13 weeks at the time. Is that correct? Or was it
12 or
11?
13 weeks, I
12,
believe.
okay. Okay. Just wanted, all right, thanks.
So that kind of set me straight there, realizing that I was not in charge. He ended up making me the laundry petty officer. It ended up being I don't think he meant it as a punishment. I think he meant it as I'm going to mentor you, and give you some responsibility, and it did.
Right.
And then I think the other thing in boot camp that changed me, which I think changed a lot of other people, was, and I don't know if they still do this or not, but they cycle you really, really, really hard for a long time, until you're exhausted. And then they get the biggest guy, I think, in the company, and they give him an American flag, and they tell him to run around the barracks while they play "Proud to Be an American." And not a dry eye in the room after that. But I think that also instilled in me, we are a team, and we're going to be a brotherhood. And really, that really also, kind of changed my view on life, and how I was going to start in my Navy career.
So the one team, one fight ethos became a reality for you, or at least it started to bud a little bit while you were in Orlando. And it is an awakening, isn't it? When you realize that depending on other people, being vulnerable to other people is an okay thing, right? I mean, you would have not made it. And I think maybe that's what your recruit commander was trying to teach you, is that you're not going to do this by yourself. It's not possible. So, and that's a lesson that, you got to teach your children, your grandchildren too. We'll get back to them as well. I'm sure you are, being the role model you are. So your changes were pretty significant. You went from a sort of I'll use the word contentious family environment before you joined, and you got out understanding that you had to play well with others, or you weren't gonna number one, you weren't gonna make it, and the unit wasn't gonna make it, because the battle stations I don't know what the battle stations were like when you were. That's a graduation ceremony for those, sort of a graduation exercise, if you will. Was specifically designed so that if there were people trying to do things on their own, they were going to fail, right? And then you experienced that firsthand. That was sort of the graduation thing. That was the culminating event, if you will, correct?
No, I don't remember that being the event for us. That came later. But I did get to see battle stations. I took some chief selects there. We did get to observe battle stations one night. So, but yes, that definitely is a team builder. Like I said, I don't remember us doing that. I think we did some firefighting, but I don't remember doing a battle station scenario like they do now.
Yeah, I watched them a couple times. I went to speak at Great Lakes a couple times and watched them, and the young men and women were just so into helping each other out. They understood it. It had been inculcated into their culture, and they knew that they were going to fail if they didn't help each other out. And I saw that when we were on every ship that we were on, the ships that you were on, and of which there were several here and throughout my career. So I'm going to get back to one team, one fight and your oath in just a moment, because I want to sort of try to encapsulate the rest of this. So you left Recruit Training Command, and did you go directly to George Washington?
No, I went to A school in Meridian.
Yeah. So did you do
personnel in A school?
Okay, and then you had Lincoln and Enterprise before GW?
I did. My first duty station was Lincoln. I was stationed with my brother on Lincoln.
Oh, cool.
Which you would think would be a good thing.
Yeah.
But my brother got in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And so we look a lot alike. And so everybody kind of associated me with my brother, and they were thinking that I was getting in trouble. I was trying to keep a clean reputation and do well. And he still kind of had that and I would say this to him too. He still kind of had that mouth, that didn't stop.
Right.
And so, so like I said, it caught me on a couple different places. For I'd say, for example, on Lincoln, I did the muster report for the entire ship, and as an E3, and I had a chief up in Air Department that had was having issues with the muster report, so he called me up to Air Department, and I had actually just been promoted to E4, PN3, and I was up there working with this chief, and a senior chief came over, and he started to yell at me, and told me he was going to take me to captain's mast. I was impersonating a third-class petty officer, and it was funny because the chief didn't say a word; he just laughed, and I'm thinking, "Why are you laughing? And then finally he told the senior chief. He said, "Look, senior chief, this is Petty Officer Altman. He's a personnelman. He works in the personnel department, not Airman Altman." And so senior chief didn't say anything. He just shrugged his shoulders, and he said, "Oh," and walked away. And then that ties into another Vinson story that we can tell later if you want. But
Okay.
But I didn't argue with him. He's a senior chief. I'm a third-class petty officer. So I'm not gonna
Right.
when you're like that, chiefs, senior chiefs, and master chiefs are gods. And so, right. But yeah, I thought that was But he just I also really didn't want to go to California.
Right.
And Lincoln was transitioning to California. So I swapped with the sailor that wanted to go back to California over to the Enterprise. So I did the Enterprise for a short period of time before I went to the George Washington.
Right. And that's where I met you, was on George Washington. And so, Chris and I were joking about this. I had forgotten about the races to the bridge from the second deck. And so, and Chris and I had sort of integrated responsibilities. If we had a man overboard, for example, we'd have to be up on the bridge level, taking muster from the various departments to make sure we had all hands accounted for, because sometimes somebody would throw something over the side of the ship that looked like a life vest or a saltwater activated location device. And we were instructed to call man overboard, even if we just thought remotely that there was a chance. We didn't want to lose anybody. So Chris and I were both, sort of working hand in hand to make sure we had the muster in. And I would always race Chris to the flight deck or to the bridge. It was about 10 stories of fairly vertical ladders, as I recall. We both claim that we were the winners of that race, and I suspect that it was pretty close because we made it a competition. Everything was a competition, which I loved, quite frankly. And I so enjoyed that with you because it was you have to make lemonade from the lemon somehow. Sometimes life is tough and working hard. So my recollection was working on the second deck, which is where you worked, that I could spend a lot of time. I saw you, located you. We had a lot of conversations, and I enjoyed them so much, which is why I thought that tour was one of the, it was I had a lot of fun there, and I was there for quite a while. So I went through 2 commanding officers, and of course I got to see you from 91 to 93. So that was pretty cool. What are your recollections on George Washington? What takeaways that either positively or negatively that sort of have impacted maybe how you lead and how you work with other people? I mean, what were the takeaways from that tour for you?
That tour, I think, kind of set my my career in motion. As far as my leadership, I was privileged to work with some really good leaders in the personnel department. Warrant Officer Vola, I had worked with him on the Lincoln as well. Master Chief Snow, and Petty Officer Kraft, who retired as a commander. But they really taught me the importance of integrity and leadership. They entrusted me to run the customer service department on the ship as a second class. I learned a big lesson with that in leadership, and I'll share this story if it's okay.
Okay, please.
At the time I was the transfer and discharge petty officer. And so I was transferring at that time. We were transferring a lot of people to TPU for different reasons. There were a lot of different reasons that we were getting rid of people back in those days. And I was
TPU, for people who don't understand, is what?
Transient Personnel Unit.
Okay, all right.
We would send them there when we had to get underway, or we couldn't keep them on the ship until they got either new orders or got discharged. But for some reason, and I don't want to throw the reactor department under the bus, but they were the worst at getting evals to us for transfer evals.
Right.
And we lost. It was a lot of their guys that were going. A lot of the nuclear guys were going to TPU. And it was getting so overwhelming that I was just sending messages saying, eval to follow. Well, that caught up with me because I wasn't following up on the evals. And so we got a message. The captain got a message from the commanding officer of TPU stating that, there were missing several evaluations. And so they woke, Petty Officer Kraft came and woke me up out of my rack, and I had to come and explain to Mr. Vola and Master Chief what I was doing. And that's where I really think I learned responsibility. And because while Mr. Vola and Master Chief signed off on those messages, they were trusting me to be doing the right thing. And so I honestly really thought I was going to captain's mast. But Master Chief told me something. He said, Petty Officer Altman, he said, we would have probably done the same thing. The difference is we know to follow up. We would have followed up. And he said, you're writing checks that your pay grade can't cash. And so they really kind of put me on the path of being more responsible, right, and having more integrity when I'm sending stuff out, following up,
right,
if you would. But there, I learned, like I said, I learned a lot from those three. I consider them mentors and friends. But I learned a lot from those three on that one tour about leadership and how to take it more serious. It wasn't just you're wearing that crow. There was some responsibility behind it.
Absolutely. And so learning about, who you're accountable to and what you're responsible for is a lesson that a lot of people, quite frankly, today aren't learning because they don't want it. They're running away from those things as fast as they can. And various levels of leadership in our government and other places, and solid citizens like you have figured it out, and that's why you're doing such great things now and volunteering for some wonderful work. That's why I think you're so valuable as a scoutmaster and another key figure along the line is people, because people watch you and they see it, right? And you know it. It's all about presence, right? You know what you're about now. You've got your shoulders back. You've got a way ahead. You've got a set course of where you're going to go, and I think it's pretty powerful. Let me go back. How many times do you think you've taken the oath of enlistment during your re-enlistment ceremonies, or
probably five or six?
First time was at Orlando, right? During recruit training.
First time, I think the first time was before we left for recruit training.
Okay.
And then I think maybe again in Orlando.
Okay. So during those 5 or 6 times, what about the oath has changed for you? I mean, it can be just a set of words, but you and I, what I learned in my life is I always taught what it meant when we were swearing allegiance to the Constitution, this ideal that's the Constitution. That embedded in that is that preamble, and in the preamble are all the tactical things that we're supposed to be responsible for, right? Securing the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, et cetera, et cetera. What did you learn, or how did the oath change you, or maybe have more significance in your recollection of what you were responsible for and accountable to? Did it take on increased meaning as your career has continued?
It did. I mean, when I first took it, I didn't know what I was saying. I knew this is what I was doing to go to the Navy. And so it didn't really have a whole lot of meaning. And maybe the first time I took it for reenlistment, it didn't mean as much. But by the last couple times, and definitely the last time that I took it, it's very powerful. It's not just saying the words. You learn over your career that it's more than just repeating something so you can re-enlist. It
Mhm.
is, it really drives, I think, the core values of what the Navy tries to instill, what the Navy tries to instill in us. And what I'm glad that they kind of gave me, throughout my career.
Right.
I don't want to make my parents sound like they were bad people, because they were great people. My parents are
Right.
still alive, and they were great people. I was the that cog in the wheel. So,
Right.
and I learned that as I grew and matured. But I was at least 90% of the problem.
Well, and the fact that you recognize that is part of the solution, right? I mean, I have the same basic story in many ways. We all sort of can choose which way we want to behave or operate or conform, whatever the term that you care to use. But however it ends is, parents notwithstanding, the person that's going to shape or affect who you are is you. I mean, and others who influence you, your lovely bride and others as well. But I think it's so important that you recognize that. And when I administered the oath, I didn't need a card. I knew it. I'm sure you knew it, the words. But the "So help me God" piece at the end always reminded me that there's sort of a final signature on this, right? For those of us that believe in our faith, there's a lot of connection there for me. It's a very emotional thing. So it's why I was asking that question. Um, from your perspective, I was telling you I use the term "all in" a lot. So, and I don't know if you ever saw the movie Greyhound with Tom Hanks in it.
I don't think I have.
It's a great movie. It's a World War II movie, and he had just taken over command of a ship. And not to spend more than 30 seconds on this, he had to find himself totally immersed in his ship, or they were going to basically get sunk by submarines. And it reminded me how I felt all in during every tour, but particularly as the XO in George Washington, as a CO on Carl Vinson. What does all in to mean to you? I mean, in terms of your approach to anything, not just the Navy, but to your family and to your volunteer work. Can you put it into words as to what all in might mean to you?
Um, it means you give everything. It's something that, whether good or bad, the Navy instilled in me. When I see there's a need somewhere and I get involved, and my wife she'll back me up on back. She'll say I can't do anything a little bit.
Yeah.
Anything that I do, I have to do 100%,
Yeah.
or it doesn't. I can't do it. I just can't be a dad and watch my kids play sports. I have to
Right.
be there. I have to be involved. I just can't,
Right.
join a scout troop and only go on campouts a couple times a year. And that's, like I said, that's something that the Navy instilled in me. When you do something, you do it 100% and you do it right.
Right. Right. Now there's so many people that are afraid to put their toes in the water, and it's a risk thing, and they're afraid to fail. I always felt like, there was always failure. You mentioned your experience with the chief up in the air department. I mean, you knew that you had to go up there, or more importantly, maybe your story about the evals for that that were required. Um, Failure sometimes it becomes a learning lesson. You learn from that, and you learned from that on several occasions, as I have on many occasions. So I want to go back to your kids and your grandchildren for a minute. I'm presuming this, but I want to hear from you because I know the character of the man that I'm talking to here. Um, I mean, so you're teaching, right? You're teaching your granddaughters. Your sons are old enough that they've probably got a good uh, core of basically discipline and ethics around them. What do you talk? What do you tell your granddaughters when it comes to their presence and how important their behavior is today? And because they're still kids, and for the most part, they probably don't think about this unless you actually have a conversation with them. What do you tell them about their presence and and the fact that people shape opinions about them based on what they see when there's an interaction going on. Even if it's not, it could be an interaction with a third party, right? But if I'm watching a couple kids interact, I form an opinion, on how they're behaving or how they're responding to each other. What are your conversations like when you're talking to your granddaughters?
I don't know that I've really had to encounter that much. My granddaughters are pretty friendly, and so their encounters with other people are pretty good. Now my one youngest granddaughter is a little bit shy, so I try to convince her that not to talk. It's okay to talk. If I'm talking to somebody, it's probably okay to talk to them. But she doesn't. But I think their interaction with each other is what more I have to deal with, because they're sisters.
Yeah.
And so they do squabble a lot, and and argue a lot. So I have to remind them constantly that they're sisters, and that they need to love and respect each other. They're not always going to get along, but they've got each other for life. And that's hard for a 4 and 7-year-old to understand. But
right.
But like I said, I really haven't had to deal with that just yet with them, because they're still kind of young.
Well, but I think the point I was trying to make is that you can, and you're so well equipped to talk about this. When I talk about power of presence, that means that how you act, how you treat others, how you is a reflection on who you are, and that they just need to know that people
Right.
are always watching them or observing them, not to grade them. They're not going to come out and give them a grade, but this power of presence thing, if they figure it out now. And I have granddaughters that are ages 8, 10, and we have conversations about this about every time I get a chance to have a private conversation with them, because I think it's important they understand that that people that presence can be a positive experience for people or a negative experience for people, a bubbly experience for people or a downer experience for people. And as long as you're out and about, why don't you make it positive and experiential, right? I mean, it's something that I think that they want to, and they don't have to work it. They're doing it already. They just don't sometimes realize, because they're so, they're having a conversation like you and I have a conversation. They don't see the peripheral, right?
Right.
And so it's a pretty eye-opening thing. Uh, you had a story you wanted to tell. I try to keep these conversations for about 35 to 40 minutes. I could talk to you for hours, and we'll get back and talk some more. What you had a story you said you wanted to tell, for there's time, and there's time. So I wonder if do you want to go to that story?
Yeah, we can go back to that real quick. So that same
Okay.
senior chief, when I got on Carl Vinson, I
Yeah.
deployed on Carl Vinson with you as the commanding officer.
Right.
I was attached to VFW or VF 213, the Fighting Blacklions.
Right.
And it was Christmas Eve. We had a Christmas Eve in the hangar bay.
Right.
This Master Chief walked up to me. This Air Master Chief walks up to me, and he says, "Petty Officer Altman, I owe you an apology."
Wow.
He said, "I don't know if you remember me," he said, "but I yelled at you a few years back." He said, "Assuming you were a brother, your brother." And he said, "But I wanted to apologize to you, for that."
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's powerful. I said that, he's a Master Chief. I'm a first class. And it's this many years later, 5 or 6 years later, and he came to me and apologized to me for yelling at me that many years. So
That's great.
he had remembered that as much as I had remembered it, but I had remembered it as a funny story, after that. But he had remembered it enough to apologize to me, and I thought that was pretty powerful.
Well, so it hung with him for that many years. All of us. I'm a big believer in solitude. I reflect every day on how my day went, what I could have done better, what I should be doing for the next day, right? And somewhere along the line, he probably that night he probably realized that I wasn't very chief worthy or master chief worthy
Right.
in that particular moment. Yeah, and the fact that he reached out to you when he next saw you was, I think, it was a check in his box of things I got to do. I mean, I owe this young man this apology. That's the humility part of leadership, right? Everyone thinks that leadership's all about power, but it's more about humility. Because if you can be humble and approachable and admit mistakes when you make them, it makes your whatever power you have that much more just a larger in life sort of thing, right? Um, Let me ask you a question, and this is I'm not looking for any particular answer here, but you're one of the few people probably that saw me as an executive officer and as a commanding officer. One is a little closer than the other, but I mean, ships are only so big, right? So we we are in the same basic piece of metal. How did I change? I mean, what do you see? Did you see anything different from when we first met and when I was a commanding officer in Carl Vinson?
I know I honestly I saw the same integrity, the same leadership, great leadership that you had. I consider you one of my mentors as well. That going to having to ship rate you to the bridge, for man overboard, just that little piece of our interaction. There were a couple things you taught me in there as well about leadership. Is you caught me in the CO's office on the I can't remember what level it was, but it's just a couple levels below the bridge.
Right.
Caught me in there one day before a man overboard drill because the yeoman had given me heads up that we were about to have man overboard, and they knew that we were racing to the bridge, and so you had caught me there, and you had after the man overboard drill, you had talked to me in your office and said, we don't do it that way. We do it the right way. And so, and I think it wasn't that nice. I don't think there was a little sternness to it that said, we don't, we do it the right way. And I don't expect that to happen again. And so no, I from the interactions I've had with you, I've seen the same, leadership, you're solid, and that's what's important.
Well, the reason I ask is I was hoping that would be the answer. Actually, the reason I ask is we all change, but I wanted my and as I look at my career and I've written about this, I wanted the changes to be gradual, sort of like boiling a frog, right? I wanted to learn from the experiences I had. I so enjoyed our little competitive banter on GW. It was there were no awards given. We didn't win any medals for being first. It was just you and I having this little friendly thing go on, and so and maybe I was a little stern in telling you we don't do it that way because I did want to win, but but the relationship is equally good, and I have to say this as well, maybe as a closing comment. You're one of my mentors as well. I learn a lot from every young man and woman who served with me, either by their actions, again, power of presence, right? Either by their actions or what they say. And sometimes what they say is pretty blunt. They might have a disagreement with me or say, hey, we didn't appreciate this. And on Carl Vinson, I can recall 3 distinct instances where in front of an all hands call, 3,000 sailors in the hangar bay, I apologized to them for maybe a blurt of temper. Well, there was at least one of those because I knew that I was wrong, and because I couldn't set a bad example for any of you. I didn't know that you and I'd be sitting here on a video today until just a couple of weeks ago when I decided to do this crazy blog thing or podcast thing. But I'm so glad that we're doing this, and I'm re-engaging with people I hadn't talked to in a long time. And I wish the Navy would do this at large. I wish they'd come to the Chris Altmans of the world and say, what were your experiences when you were a sailor, and learn from those experiences, because I think we're shooting a little bit in the blind on some of the policies and processes we're putting in place right now, and not asking the questions about how did it work for you, when you were on board. I mean, we haven't changed that much that that information is not valuable. You have any closing thoughts or comments you want to talk about?
I want to thank you because you did bring something up that's important with my granddaughters, and
Okay.
maybe start having those conversations, because I never really thought about it in that perspective till you had said,
Mhm.
And I think they're at least the 7-year-old's at the age where she can understand it a little bit more.
Mhm. Mhm.
So no, I just wanted to tell you I'm putting that in my toolbox.
Put it, please. Yeah, and I love. Go ahead.
But I thank you for that. And you had said humility, and that's one of the biggest things in leadership. When I was on The Simpsons, I made chief on The Simpsons, And
Right.
we were underway for 6 months when we went through our chiefs. We called it initiation then. It's called
Right.
something else now.
Yep.
But the master chief was in. We shared the same office because the ship is so small. The command
Right.
master. He made me wear a bracelet that said humility on it the entire initiation.
Wow.
And
Cool.
so it either said humility or humble. I can't remember. It said one of those two words. But it was powerful enough for me to realize that if you're not humble and if you can't step in front of somebody, like you said, and say, I'm sorry, even if it's your troops,
Right.
to me, you end up looking weaker.
I think you're 100% right. Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. I mean, this is so true. Well, this is cathartic for me to be able to talk to you again. And please pass my best to your bride and your children and your granddaughters. And you know, and I don't know how, you know, I don't ever tell my granddaughters that I'm special. I mean, I hope that they think I am, but your granddaughters are figuring it out as well. I mean, I think you're a unique man, and thank you for your continued work. Thank you for your continued deposits into this country. We need more people like you, in my opinion. And we'll stay in touch. I want you to stay on. I'm going to stop the recording here in just a second, and then you and I will say our final goodbyes, at least for today. But thank you so much for coming on today. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you spending some time.
All right, young man, I'm going to do this. Let's see if I can do this here.